with that, and really spot on with this conversation, we have two luminaries in the field, two executives who are leading this effort, this significant transformation. Both Seth Rainford, who's the co-founder, president, and COO of a company called Digital Diagnostics, which it's amazing that you'd have a company named after the symposium. Seth, welcome.
Yes, very excited to be with you all today. As you mentioned, I have the pleasure of serving as president and COO and co-founder, and I particularly love the title of the symposium, and excited to be here.
No, I appreciate you letting us use your company's name for the symposium. So hopefully no attorneys are going to get involved here. And then obviously Labcorp, a name everybody knows and internationally known, certainly one of the national leaders in the field of labs and lab services for decades now. And again, welcome Patrick McDonagh, who is the Director of Corporate Development at and New Ventures and Strategic Alliances at Labcorp. So again, Patrick and Seth, if you could both put your LinkedIn links into the chat box so our community could reach out and connect with you with potential alliances and collaborations. It's a big part of what we do at the lab is try to help people connect with each other so we can accelerate the adoption of digital to the optimal adoption of digital to help patients around the world. Let's kick it off though. I think, really you're both in the midst of this revolution, again, more of like a 10-year switch from single digit to now what we're anticipating to be high double digit adoption of digital diagnostics in the home, in the office, et cetera, outside of traditional lab facilities. Let's start, maybe Seth, if you could just go through a 30-second background of yourself and what you do with digital diagnostics.
You bet. So I've been with the company in some capacity for about 3 years now. Previous to this was at a fantastic company, Labcorp Diagnostics, and previous to that was at Northwestern Medicine in Chicagoland. So very excited to be with you all.
Wonderful, thank you. And Patrick, same, if you could give us a little bit of your background as well.
Sure, thanks, Stan. So I'm Patrick McDonough. I'm a Director of New Ventures and Strategic Alliances at Labcorp, and Labcorp is a leading global life sciences company that aims to provide vital information to physicians, pharmaceutical companies, payers, and patients themselves to help them make better, clearer, and more confident decisions. So we have two main verticals, one of which is our clinical diagnostics business that provides and processes 500,000 samples per day across the United States. We serve 400,000 unique providers annually and have 160 million patient encounters across all types of diseases, a test menu of over 5,000, everything from high volume primary care testing to highly specialized genetic testing, molecular profiling, and rare disease. And then on our other vertical, we have a full service contract research organization that operates in over 100 countries, everything from drug discovery through preclinical testing, central lab services, as well as phase 1 through phase 4 trial operations. And with respect to my specific role, I sit at the enterprise level and really focus on helping all of our business units achieve their strategic growth objectives through external innovation and new technology, namely through partnership with other companies. So our team is tasked with identifying unmet needs, sourcing potential partnership opportunities, conceptualizing the potential relationship structure, and then also negotiating and executing those partnerships. And then we also have a venture fund that makes equity investments in early stage private companies, primarily in the Series A or seed through Series B space, in areas of strategic interest to Labcorp.
That's fantastic. And again, just to stay in touch with the chat box, there's a lot of good questions coming through the chat box. Vipula, you asked if these sessions are recorded and they will be available. Yes, they are recorded, and yes, they will be available. Just go ahead and subscribe to the HITLAB YouTube channel. Jerry will drop in the YouTube channel link for HITLAB for subscribing there, and the video production team edits and then drops these out over the next several days, and that way you'll be able to see the videos as they're made available. Let's keep going with you, Patrick, and really your definition of digital diagnostics. I know, like digital health has many different definitions, whether it's the original definition created in the Creative Destruction in Medicine book in 2012, or whether it's the WHO, the AMA, the HIMSS, At the FDA has its own definition of digital health. Digital diagnostics also has begun to take that type of turn where you're seeing different communities define it differently. Patrick, how do the folks at Labcorp define digital diagnostics?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, Stan. As you said, I think when we think about digital diagnostics, we really view it as maybe the more niche definition of software as a medical device, or tools that can provide a diagnostic result outside of what would be a traditional sample collection. So if you think about Labcorp today, on our test menu, almost all of that today is blood, urine, tissue-based testing that's delivering a diagnostic result. I think when we think about digital diagnostics, what is really exciting is being able to complement that with new biomarkers or new methods for diagnosing disease, whether that be biometric and vital sign measurements for blood pressure through your cell phone camera, or whether that be things like analyzing gait, speech patterns, eye tracking for neurodegenerative disease or mental and behavioral health. So I think that's how we think about digital diagnostics. For sure, there's a lot of digital tools that are enabling care, as well as digital technologies that perhaps aid providers in diagnosing disease or provide quality control when you think of things like digital pathology, for example. But when we're thinking about digital diagnostics, we're very much more focused on what you could envision as a traditional clearance for a diagnostic outside of a traditional tissue, blood, or urine sample.
That's fantastic. And Seth, if you could expand upon that, and just if you have the same definition, or if your definition has some other elements to it that we could hear.
Yes, Dan, I love that you're starting from a point of definition. Oftentimes when we talk about this, we start at the very same spot. In our world, we often parse it out as assistive AI and autonomous AI. And so what that means to us, at least, I think is relatively well understood now, is on that assistive piece, you really have something where a medical decision is still being made by a clinician. Oftentimes, or I think most of the time, the result is asynchronous, meaning the test is being done, or the information or sample, as Patrick said, is being collected. And then some period of time later, several hours, usually several days, you're getting a result back that then becomes actionable or not at that point. And sometimes you need specialty care involved, of course, in this scenario. And similarly, you would expect, or it would follow then, that liability rests with that clinician making the medical decision. On the other hand, what we probably spend most of our time on, although I will say certainly we could see potential value in both, is autonomous AI, where sort of the inverse of all of those things that I just said is true, where the medical decision itself is made by a computer, not a human. The result is instantaneous. It is available right then and there for both the clinician and the patient. So a conversation and potential referral can be made in real time. And as a result, or a natural consequence of that, the liability then rests with the creator of the AI. So I suppose in our world, as I said, value in both, but our first product in the market, IDXDR for diabetic retinopathy, is in fact autonomous. And we see ourselves as building a platform of autonomous AIs where that medical decision, again, is made by the computer, not the human.
All right, so very good definitional points, and really appreciate your expansion there of the definition and really the focus on AI. That's fascinating. And certainly one of the things that we're seeing at HITLAB with our research is, with a lot of the failures of AI over kind of the 2010 to 2020 timeframe, we saw some massive ones where the ticket price for AI could start out at $50 to $150 million for an implementation. We don't want to name any names on this program, but I think most people know who we're talking about. We saw just incredible failures. And now what we're seeing, and those are well covered, by the way, look at Wall Street Journal, things like that, you'll find them. Now what we're seeing is a kind of a restitution of AI done in a more rational, smaller, cleaner data, lowered expectations. And we're seeing the use of AI now actually show results. And so that is really important. And so now we're seeing a high growth of AI, not with ticket prices of 50 to 150 million, but of prices that are a little bit more down to earth, 500,000 to 5 million, and with smaller data sets that are consistently clean and can produce the kinds of values that you want to see and the kinds of value creation you want to see with AI. So really appreciate that expansion. Now, for a second here, Patrick, if you could talk about the kinds of perspectives that you're bringing and that Labcorp is bringing to some of these opportunities for partnering and for really improving services and being able to tackle some of these challenges in the digitization of diagnostics in healthcare, and talk a little bit about what Labcorp is seeing there.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think we see it as a very exciting and evolving space in a way that we certainly can help partners and grow the space more broadly. You know, I think when you think about Labcorp, some of our key initiatives, I think there's 3 points about digital diagnostics that really excite us. The first is we're really looking to decentralize some of our previously centralized services and use our operational and logistics footprint in new and unique ways. So we have a network of over 1,800 patient service centers across the US that traditionally have been used for phlebotomy and basic biometric screening. And I think it's really interesting to think about how that same network could be utilized to perhaps enable some of these digital diagnostic tools, or even, you know, Seth and digital diagnostics themselves, to be able to give their technology to a broad population and enable really easy access to those populations. So I think we certainly can support there as one of the largest operations and logistics providers in the healthcare space more broadly today. I think the second one is just around our goals of omni-channel engagement and seamlessly engaging with the patient over time. We're talking about digital diagnostics, but you can actually envision how you could use those same biomarkers, whether they're software, imaging, or AI enabled, for things like monitoring or even therapeutic impact as well. So while the digital diagnostic could initially diagnose the patient in the same fashion, you could take those changes over time to see if the patient's improving, or even pair, you know, certain therapeutics that utilize digital technologies with traditional pharmacotherapy to drive better adherence and better outcomes. So I think we view not just the diagnostic piece of this exciting, but how that could be applied to both monitoring as well as therapeutics as well. And I think the, you know, the third piece that is generally exciting to us is just the ability to capture data in different ways, help customers make better decisions, as I mentioned previously, and just enable new opportunities for patients to drive their care, as well as physicians to make better decisions as technology continues to evolve.
That's fantastic. And Seth, if you could chime in on that as well, in terms of where you're seeing some of the obstacles and some of the opportunities in the digitization of digital diagnostics.
Yeah, I'll just piggyback a little bit on what Patrick said. As you might imagine, as we think about, or as somebody like a Labcorp thinks about the existing test menu of traditional lab testing, right, clinical and anatomic pathology, and the traditional sample, and now we're moving into talking about things like digital samples, the expansion of a test menu, or the types of things you can do. Patrick mentioned longitudinal data tracking, for example, and analysis over time. It gets pretty exciting. Not to mention, I think the other point I would make there is the highlighting the logistics and the physical infrastructure that Patrick hit on. You have these groups, and Labcorp is the absolute perfect example, where not only are they're a huge provider of logistics in really meaningful ways, but they have this brick and mortar physical infrastructure where today their patients are already trafficking, right? The patients are going to get those more traditional clinical tests. For our first example around diabetes and diabetic retinopathy, the patients are showing up in the PSCs to get their A1C already, right? So if while they're there, we can leverage infrastructure that's there, people that are already there, and processes and workflow that's already existing, and we're not asking to change a bunch of things, and now we're actually adding on value-added testing that they otherwise would have had to make 1 or 2 additional trips to get. Now I think we're really getting somewhere, and I think we are, you know, it's a supposed cliche to say, but we are meaningfully moving the needle on democratizing access that patients really need.
Incredible. And we've got about a minute left. And again, just sticking with you for a second here, Seth, what do we need to do to really increase the adoption rate of digital diagnostics across all the different ecosystems, patients, physicians, providers, et cetera?
Well, perhaps an obvious answer, but as we look to really scale, and that is what we're doing right now, safety is top of mind, right? So we talked about it a little bit earlier in the conversation, but there's a reason we started with FDA and making sure that this was something both patients and providers and systems were very, very comfortable with. So I would just say, especially as we as a company are scaling, keeping safety and doing things rigorously, validating them before we take something to market, using your earlier example, is where I would start and end, is we got to do it the right way. Hence our tagline, AI the right way.
And then obviously, Patrick, wind it up. Bring us home, Patrick. What do we have on your side of that question, that answer?
Yeah, I think on our side, at least how we can support the business, it's a lot more around the regulatory and reimbursement side of things. You know, historically, there's been different certifications. There's been different place of service requirements for traditional diagnostic testing versus imaging. And now that you're starting to see kind of that blending of software and traditional diagnostics, I think there's a lot that can be done or can be clarified with respect to how traditional diagnostic players can bill for and get reimbursed for some of the services that Seth is providing. So I think that's one of the big pieces for us, is just figuring out that regulatory aspect. And then also post launch, as Seth probably knows better than anyone, I think there's some interesting nuances around improvements to algorithms and what that means from the regulatory process. You know, if you're using a mobile phone, is running your clinical trial on Android enough to get full clearance across all types of cell phones, or are you going to have to run a completely different clinical trial on an iOS device just because it's a different operating system, albeit the algorithm exactly the same? So I think on our side, we're thinking a lot through the regulatory aspects, just especially as there are certain hurdles in terms of how we can actually traditionally certify and run diagnostic testing versus interesting and innovating technologies such as this from a regulatory and billing perspective.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you both. And again, for the audience, please do take a look at the chat box. We'll cover issues like this in the Columbia Business School program on a regular basis, and would love to have you join us there. Patrick and Seth, thank you both.
Thanks, Dan.
Nice to be with you.